Tonight we're going to be I'm going to be talking about my top favorite story in the entire Bible, and that is Joseph. He is my Bible hero. You know, he covers a lot of different topics and the way he confronts them, and I'm very excited to talk to him. I could go on in many sermons talking about it, and it took me all day trying to condense mine down so we weren't here all night. So for the sake of time, towards the beginning and towards the end, I'm going to do a lot of summary, but I'll still make sure to get my points. So if you guys would like to turn with me to Genesis 35, while I do a little bit of background for you. The background is on Jacob, Joseph's father. A lot of people know this story very well, brother of Esau, but also a lot of people don't, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it real quick. Jacob was the brother of Esau, and sometime in his mid to young life, I'm not sure roughly what age, I'm not even sure if it tells us, but he's not the main character of this story. So he found a man named Laban, and Laban had two daughters, Leah and Rachel. Rachel was the younger of the two, and from what we're told, the more attractive of the two also. And Jacob wanted to marry Rachel, so he went to Laban and made a deal with him. He wanted to work for Laban for 7 years, and at the end of the 7 years, Laban would allow him to marry his younger daughter, Rachel. So that's exactly what he did. For 7 years, Jacob worked as a shepherd. He worked for Laban, keeping the flocks, the cattle, all the stuff that he had. And at the end of the 7 years, Leah, I don't know if it was out of jealousy necessarily, but Leah went to her father Laban and conspired with him for her to be married instead of Rachel. So Leah, and if you actually think about that, that is very similar to how Jacob and his mother conspired to get his father's blessing instead of Esau. So goes around, comes around, I guess. So after the 7 years, they had their wedding, and the morning after, Jacob realizes this is not the woman he's been looking forward to marrying for 7 years. So obviously angered, he confronts Laban, and Laban tells him an excuse. The excuse being, well, it's customary. The oldest daughter must be married first, right? So then out of that, Jacob decides to try it again one more time and work and come up with the same deal, 7 more years, and he gets the other daughter, the daughter he really wants. And Laban agrees, and they go through the 7 years, and finally they have the marriage, and Jacob gets the wife that he has been wanting for 14 years now. Eventually, they move off, and that concludes the story for that of what I'm going to be covering. And that is the background to the beginning of the story of Joseph, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But first, let's read Genesis 35. We're going to be starting in verse 17. And it came to pass, when she was in hard labor, that the midwife said unto her, Fear not, thou shalt have this son also. And it came to pass, as her soul was in departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni. But his father called him Benjamin. And Rachel died, and was buried in the way of Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. And Jacob set a pillar upon her grave, that is the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. And Israel journeyed and spread his tent beyond the tower of Adar. And it came to pass, when Israel dwelt in that land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah his father's concubine. And Israel heard it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, and Levi, and Judah, and Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. And the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's handmaid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob, which were born to him in Pandarim. And Jacob came unto Isaac his father unto Mamre unto the city of Araba, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. And the days of Isaac were 180 years. And Isaac gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people, being old and full of days. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. So this gives us a clear list of not only Joseph's brothers, but also which wives, which women they are from, whose sons they were. Now, to most people, that's just a detail in the book. It's not a big deal, but to Jacob and to all of his sons, that was a very big deal. And as we're going to learn that in just a minute. So we are now going to turn to Genesis 37 to learn more about that. Alrighty, and Genesis 37, let's just start in verse 1. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his sons and brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed yet another.
He said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the same. So this clearly spells out that his brothers all hated him for the sole purpose of he was highly favored by his father. They all obviously wanted their father to be proud of them, but he was the only one who really received the most of it. And not only that, he received a lot more, such as a very nice coat of many colors. Now, the dreams that it talks about here, those dreams don't make them hate him. They're just the last straw on the camel's back. They are what lead Joseph through the next part of the story. They're what caused him to finally come to this next section of his life, which we are going to pick up again here in verse 12. Now, I don't know why he decided to tell his brothers this story. I don't know if it was he was proud of himself, or he was bragging, or if it was just to let them know out of pure, not even thinking about it. But let's continue on and see what they do from there. And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to them, Here am I. And he said to him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asking him, saying, What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, They are departed hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren, and found them in Dothan. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. And we will say, Some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that it is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. And they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother, and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother, and our flesh, and his brethren were content. Funny how it changes from let's kill him to, oh, why should we kill him when we can make money off of him? Then there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. And Reuben returned unto the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. And he returned unto his brethren, and said, The child is not, and whither shall I go? And they took Joseph's coat, and killed the kid of the goats, and dipped the coat in the blood. They sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said, This have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it, and said, It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without rent in pieces. And Jacob rent his clothes, and put sackcloth upon his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, For I will go down to the grave and to my son in the morning. Thus his father wept for him. And Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's, and captain of the guard. This chapter tells us the series of events that leads Joseph into being captured and sold into slavery by his brothers. He is forced to leave all he knows, all he loves, the comfort of home, his father, who of course adored him his entire life, and he now has nothing. He is now on his way to a country where he knows nobody. He doesn't know the culture. He doesn't know, and no one there believes in the same God. And for most adults, that would be challenging. Now imagine being a kid. A kid being brought out of his home. He doesn't have the support of his family. He doesn't have the support of any friends. He is now completely alone in another country for doing nothing, seemingly. He just from being the favorite of his father. If that's not what is considered to be unfair, I don't know what is. But we'll come to see later that that is probably the best thing that has ever happened to him. Next, we are going to move on to Genesis 39, because we have to skip 38. That is not the story of Joseph. And right where 37 leaves off is right where 39 is gonna pick up. And while you're getting ready for me to read this, try and put yourself in Joseph's shoes, where you, like I said, you have no friends, no family, you're alone, you're a kid, and you've just been brought to this brand new country where you know nothing, you probably don't even know the language, and you're being sold to slavery to this guy. That would, I'm assuming, be very, very saddening or hard to deal with. I can't think of a better word this time, but it would be hard. So let's see what Joseph's response is. I'm in the wrong book. I'm in Exodus 39. That's not going to help. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt. Then Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which he had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. I want to pause right there and just mention one more thing that I kind of mentioned already, and that is they, in that country at the time, did not have the same God that Joseph did, or Jacob, that we do. They all worshipped many gods. They were pagans. They everything that you can imagine had a god for it. The sun, the moon, the stars, the water, the sea, everything had a god for it. So there's nothing that necessarily leads us to believe that Potiphar believed in Joseph's God, except maybe this verse where it says the Lord, but it's far more likely that he believed in all these other gods. But either way, he believed that the gods were with Joseph and causing him to be a prosperous man. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over all his house, and over that and all that he had, and put it into his hands. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. Now that, I think, is amazing. So Joseph is put into this new house, and obviously I'm sure this didn't happen immediately, it took time, but he was put over everything. And the captain of the guard of Pharaoh, I would imagine, had a lot of responsibilities, and he hadn't need to worry about any of them except what he was going to eat that night. Now imagine every single responsibility you have during your day-to-day, your job, your life, everything. You don't have to worry about it. You have someone doing it all for you, except maybe some food that you're going to eat at night, just making sure that you're living well. Because you had someone who was doing so well and prospering so well working for you that they took care of it all. I think that's quite impressive, honestly. And then it's going to keep going on in verse 7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment in her hand, and he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. And we're going to stop right there, and I want to make note of one more thing. Joseph, at this point in time, he was 17 when he was taken. By this time, it's a educated guess that he's about 18 to 19 years old. Most young men at this age are at their physical peak. It's when their lustful desires are at their most, and they are very easily tempted. Now, Potiphar's wife is far more than likely a rather attractive woman, because men of high status had women that were very attractive. So having a man who was second or third in the entire kingdom, he probably had a very attractive wife. And she not only once, not only twice, but day by day, every day, was throwing herself at Joseph, trying to get what she wanted. And he not only had the ability, but resisted her every day, telling her no. And I love his response. I want to go back to his response real quick and show that. And that is in verse 9. Yes, 9. And he said to her, There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. So first, he makes reference to his master. He's loyal to his master. He wants to make sure that he serves and pleases his master, and is in going behind his back in any way after the master put so much trust in him. And then the second part is my favorite part. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? That is the most important part of his response. Not only is he making reference to God in front of her and to her, but also he's like right to her face, saying that what she wants and what she's trying to do is wickedness. Now, I don't know about everybody else, but to me, I think saying someone's actions or something that they want is wickedness. It's a pretty strong word to use in conversation. But I think that shows just how strong-willed he was to resist this sort of temptation and the sin that she was trying to get to commit. And then we will continue on reading what happens after he does that in verse 11. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled, and he got him out. And then it came to pass, when she saw that she had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled, and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until the Lord came home. And she spoke unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant, which thou hast brought unto us, came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison. But the Lord, and we'll pause right there. And so where the king's prisoners were kept is typically back then a more severe kind of prison. Prisons back then were not anything like a prison we have today. They don't feed you regularly. They don't give you clothes. Commonly, they wouldn't feed you, and they would just tell you to fend for yourself. And they very often didn't give you clothing. For instance, in the New Testament, Paul, when he wrote to Timothy, he told Timothy to bring him his garment because he was cold and stuff. He needed clothes because the prisons there wouldn't provide that for him. So prisons back then were quite a bit more brutal than they are today. And he was kept in the king's prison, which if you are a prisoner of the king, you're even worse. You're not just a common criminal, you're the king's criminal. And so prisoners kept in that prison were treated typically even worse than that. And not only that, it's kind of insult to injury to know that not only did Joseph get imprisoned wrongfully, but he also was imprisoned for doing the right thing. He did everything he could that was right. He did right before the Lord. Everything that the Lord would have him to do, he did to the T. And yet he was still thrown in prison for it. And at this time in his life, he's now been imprisoned and cast into slavery for doing nothing wrong twice. And I don't know how that would not get a normal person down or in the outs or just severely discouraged. But that's not what happens to Joseph. So let's continue on and see what happens to Joseph here. Verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did, there he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Now, even though Joseph keeps getting discouraged by all of these terrible things that keep happening in his life, seemingly for nothing, I'm sure he's also encouraged in the fact that I'm sure he can tell by this time that the Lord is with him. Because every time he goes somewhere, he does his best, he is obedient to the Lord in what he wants, and he does everything he can. And It shows. It clearly shows. He's being put, every time he gets brought down to somewhere, he's being put back up to the top of that place. He's being a great steward. He's being very wise, and he's doing the best that he can do in the positions that he keeps being put in. And it's showing that Joseph isn't looking at his situation as all these problems and seeing these problems and letting them discourage him. He's coming into each new situation and thinking, what can I do to get the best out of this? What can I do to praise the Lord, to bring glory to God? How can I go about this in the best way? Even in prison. Then we are now going to start off in Genesis 40. Yes, Genesis 40. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. The Lord in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, a place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in war. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream, and one night each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers what were with him, that were with him in the ward of his lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me. In the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossom shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee into thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner, when thou wast his butler. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing, that they should put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket there was all manner of batements for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat out of them in the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler under his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted it to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forget. Now keep in mind, these chapters obviously are only here for our able to read. The chapter splits were not there when the books were written, so I want to read the beginning of the next verse for you. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. So not only did Joseph go about doing his Lord's will, he sat in prison for years. We have no idea how long. We're going to come to find out later that by the time the Pharaoh comes to him with these dreams in the middle of the 7 years of the plenty, which after this 2 full years, Joseph is now about 30 years old. So Joseph has spent about half his life either in slavery or in prison for doing nothing wrong and doing his best his entire life, trying to obey the Lord and do everything he can and deal with each situation that the Lord has brought to him. And yet, even after he did this thing for the baker, you'd think the baker would remember the day he almost died, or the day that he was put into prison for doing something wrong for Pharaoh, and be like, oh wait, there was a guy in prison who helped me get out. He gave me this interpretation. But no, for 2 full years, didn't even think of it. Until finally the Pharaoh has a dream, and actually he has 2 dreams, and then the butler finally remembers, oh yeah, there was this Hebrew man in prison who interpreted my dream. Maybe he can interpret yours. And 2 years goes by. That is a long time for someone to not remember such a thing. That just astounds me. I don't know what the definition of unfair is. It's a bunch of weird words that are coming from a dictionary. But I would have to say this spells that out. So we are going to read 41 and see what happens there. How does Joseph respond to this? And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in the meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. That would have to be a pretty scary dream. I would probably wake up too. And he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream. But there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto the Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servant, and put me in the ward and the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, a Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams, to each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. They brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not of me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Now, one thing I want to mention real quick after that I just thought of right now is if you think back to the first time Joseph had dreams, he talked to his father, he talked to his brothers, and just like, hey, I had these dreams, here's what they mean. The second time the baker and the butler had dreams, Joseph said, well, the interpretation comes from God, so here's what they mean. And now this last time, Joseph isn't even mentioning himself interpreting it at all. He just goes, oh, I can't interpret it, but God can. Let me go back and I'll tell you what they mean. I think that the way that he reverences God in that way is amazing. He's slow. You can see the slow maturity in his life as he grows up and gets older. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph in my dream, Behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed, well-favored, and they fed in the meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for fatness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat the first 7 fat kine, and when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning. So I awoke. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good, and behold, 7 ears withered thin, and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears, and I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh that what he is about to do. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. The 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showed unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be good, that shall be grievous, and for the dream was double unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore, see, Pharaoh didn't ask for advice. He has his advisors, he has all these things. And Joseph didn't even take this knowledge and try to barter with Pharaoh at all. He didn't try to be I've got this interpretation. I've got what it means. Now how about we make a deal? How about, I give you what you need, tell you how to deal with it, and you let me go so I can go back to my family. But no. Instead, Joseph, again, it shows his maturity and his godliness and offers up the solution and tells Pharaoh, now therefore, let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. Let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, and the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this is a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. That's got to be a pretty good moment for Joseph, having the Pharaoh reverence him like that. That must have been pretty nice. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in the vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And we're going to stop right there. Now, I want you guys to remember that back towards the beginning of Joseph's life, everything was taken from him. His family, his home, his friends, his coat, everything that was nice and good that he had in his life was completely taken away from him. And after almost 20 years, more than what he lost easily was given right back to him. After everything he went through and how loyal he was and stayed to God and did everything he asked of him, Joseph was then returned and restored, and not only that, given this great opportunity to do God's will and to be above all. Now, most people can look at Joseph's life and look at these different instances and say, how unfair? How can that possibly be right? Why would that happen to Joseph, a man who one of the only men in the entire Bible never talks about a single sin that he has? Why is it that he can go through all of this and still come out so well? Not turning away from God, not second guessing God, not questioning it. Just every situation he's put in, he immediately takes that situation and has God help him make it something completely new and better and help where he is. And it reminds me of how unfair it is for us to say that it's unfair. Because when we look through God's eyes at our situation and our lives, we can easily see that every single one of us don't deserve any of that. The only thing we deserve is hell. And for people to say that it's unfair, to be put in situations like that is almost like mocking God, because only He knows what's fair, and He has the right to give us what's fair. Luckily, through His grace, He doesn't. And that, I think, is a beautiful picture of Joseph in his life, is the grace that he's shown and the grace that he shows his brothers once they return later in the story. That's going to be a message for another time. And yeah, I think it's very important that when we get put into situations, we look to God and let God change our view of the situation, rather than look at the situation and let the situation change our view of God. And I think that is something that we could all learn from Joseph and look at and remember. Let's pray.